Welcome back to the next ChrisRodMaxShow. Today we have our hosts with us. So we have Chris, welcome back.
Hello, everyone.
And we have Rod, welcome back.
Hi, everyone.
On the show where we talk about AI, latest development every single week, and we bring you all the most exciting topics that's going on within the AI world and make sense of the AI world. And this week, we have 6 very big topics that's going on. We'll start off with Microsoft integrating Anthropic Cloud, which has been a OpenAI maxi using crypto lingo and is trying to now move over to Anthropic. And then we have Oracle landing a giant deal with OpenAI with, propelled Mr. Ellison to become the richest person on Earth. And then you have Broadcom securing a new AI chip working, as an alternative to Nvidia, all the way down to ASML, which is a chip maker, a leading chip maker in Europe, investing in Mistral, a French AI model company. And then we also have huge data center news coming out of Asia. And lastly, we're going to discuss a little bit on US AI sandbox that was put forward by US Senator Ted Cruz. And without further ado, let's dive straight in. So first topic, I guess everyone that's interesting, especially for folks who are using Microsoft, Microsoft integrated Anthropic Cloud previously has always been OpenAI or their own model. I must say their own model hasn't been very good, at least from my own testing. So we thought this was interesting because this is while they continuously to work with OpenAI, they also provide optionality. So I'd love to get both your thoughts, Chris, Rod. Maybe I'll start off with Chris. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, really interesting topics we have today on some of the biggest deals. What it really tells us, and especially the story, it's not 100% clear who's going to win this race. And we're still in this phase where there are lots of players, they get lots of funding, and it's still very, very fragmented, not only on the application layer, but also on the foundational models, as well as like the hardware. I think that's really what we can take away. And I think a move such as the one that Microsoft does shows that Microsoft and OpenAI already, they have a very weird relationship to begin with. I think in a way, Microsoft tries to get the technology, not 100% really fully utilizing it. At the same time, they're also building their own things with Copilot. And then I think now there's another diversification, if you want, to bet on another horse and going with Anthropic. I don't know exactly how they're using Claude or Anthropic next to OpenAI, or whether or not the user will be able to choose. But I do think that from a user perspective, A, the user shouldn't care, and B, hopefully they don't care, because I think it could get very confusing.
Here we see a few things, as you're saying here, Chris. On one side, it is a little bit like trying to reduce the codependency between each other, where we saw how on one side OpenAI is trying to free themselves from this dependency that they have from Microsoft, from their funding, and from being embedded in Microsoft Azure, and vice versa. So here Microsoft not wanting to have just one single vendor in their platform. It's similar to what's happening, for example, also like Amazon, AWS, they also have a multi-vendor strategy. But also here we see the specialization of the models, so here Anthropic Claude is being embedded in so Word, Excel, PowerPoint, all these Office applications. Whereas, of course, OpenAI GPT will remain powering so the copilot of so here Microsoft. And that's likely, among other things, because we've seen how this model for Anthropic Claude is really good at working with code. And at the end of the day, Excel files, PowerPoint slides, and so on is basically some form of code. Is basically, so here a Markdown is XML, etc. So these are descriptive formats that can be represented in a code form, and where Claude itself is really good for that. Even just today, you don't need to use Office 365 in order to work with these features. You can just go directly to Claude and say, hey, I need this as an Excel file, this as a PowerPoint file, and it'll generate it very easily and very powerful and much better than ChatGPT. So it makes sense that they go for a strategy of best of breed, best of crop. And for this use case, best of breed is a Claude.
Yeah, I think that basically shows that AI is not about loyalty, but optionality. I can see all the consultants and investment bankers someday talking to their Microsoft device. Please fix. Great. Speaking of optionality, moving on. We also have, I guess, on the other side of the story, where OpenAI also strike a huge deal with Oracle, like 300 billion cloud deal. And, it's a 5-year contract, which cloud compute for OpenAI. And it is, I think, one of the largest cloud deals in history. And as we mentioned before, OpenAI obviously has a very good relationship. Well, should I say, has a working relationship with Microsoft previously, where Microsoft has been supporting a lot of those hosting. And this to us is super interesting. I think that the big thing to take away from here is Larry Ellison is a very rich man. Number one. Number two, the market basically trades on future earnings. Because you sign a 5-year deal, that doesn't mean that all that compute is being used up today. So it's really, everyone is anticipating that will roll in.
Oh my God. I mean, when I heard this news, I was just shocked. I mean, what Oracle stock got an increase of 40% in one single day. The market cap almost nearly at 1 trillion from like what, 250 billion approximately. That to me just smells like a bubble. People trade on future earnings, hoping that this is going to pan out. But it to me, it shows a few things, right? So first of all, anything or any company working with OpenAI these days will definitely get a booster in terms of success because everyone is trying to get into the AI game and the AI trade. So I really hope that the audience had some Oracle stocks in their portfolio. Probably now it's too late to buy, but this is not investing advice. But I think in general, it's just so crazy. And I think it's really now the question more of, are we in a bubble? Is this going to burst at one point? Because I do think that also previously we spoke about the fact that business models are not robust at this moment in AI. There's still a lot of capex, a lot of investment going into just like the infrastructure and the platform of using AI. So I think this is something that is still a risk to see if people can really monetize AI. And the big question is like who and how much and yeah, who's going to eventually dominate this game.
I see here a little bit of a mix of things that Chris is mentioning. So here, of course, this bubble factor could be at play, but also this idea of sovereign AI, of saying, hey, we want to have our infrastructure in our country and so on. And here, Oracle, an American company, so with the data centers also in the US and so on, this is a way to secure that this technology stays in the country. And on top of that, also, we've seen with other neo clouds and infrastructure providers. So Nebius also most recently, they had also a deal with Microsoft, and as well their so valuation and their stock so also gained significantly in value. Then also specifically for Oracle is been on the radar for a while. So I don't know, they're supposed to buy TikTok or we're supposed, is as usual always unclear what will happen there. But this brought quite some attention. Then, so the focus on becoming more of an infrastructure player, as like a white label, as a just a platform, compared, for example, Azure from Microsoft is branding it. So here we see how they have pivoted from the classic business that is just running a database towards something that is more diversified. So the stock pops by 40%. That's a little bit like crypto and not a blue chip, right? So Oracle has been trading for like decades and is not necessarily the most exciting company that one can imagine. And suddenly like 40% increase in one day. So this reminds more of like a crypto asset than other things.
That's very interesting. The return on crypto, it somehow resembles crypto. Maybe we'll have an Oracle coin soon that allows you to do compute. Moving down further down the stack, we have Broadcom. So Broadcom is also a leading AI chip competitor. I believe they're famous for phone chips on all your iPhone. And they also came out with their own AI chip orders, ready to serve as an alternative to Nvidia. I thought that was, relatively interesting, and we are seeing all these giant chip makers, I guess, competing with each other. Some folks are building their own, right? You think of Apple. So love to get both your thoughts on this, right? Like really understand what this is, Rose. So the headline is Broadcom secured 10 billion in AI chip orders. It's not news that Nvidia got to really high because of all the future AI orders. At the same time, want to understand how should we think about this? Because the custom silicon that Nvidia had, obviously, it's powering a lot of the AI wave. I think folks are getting a little bit comfortable, try to work with different chip maker, but at the same time, a lot of all these investments, when will they return?
I almost feel like we should just have a podcast dedicated to the value stream of the AI industry, right? Maybe on the hardware side, there are actual bookings and actual revenue being generated, right? Like Broadcom booking 10 billion by the end of the year is really showing that on that front, at least, it's not necessarily a hype. We do see these transactions happen. It makes also a lot of sense, right? Because you do need that hardware infrastructure to power any AI models or AI use cases. So obviously, it also shows again, time and time again, that Nvidia, with their monopoly status right now, they're not safe, not necessarily. And I'm sure next to Broadcom, there are also lots of Asian players, in particular Chinese players, trying to break the code, the silicon code, if you will. And it's just a matter of time. I think right now, Nvidia is still enjoying this monopoly status, and they're trading really, really high in terms of stocks and still growing. But as competitors are catching up and perhaps even getting something that is cheaper in terms of cost, I'm sure that game is going to transition into a more maybe a duopoly, or maybe we will see like 3 or 4 players dominant in different regions. That's at least my take on this.
Well, Broadcom, I said, are a bit different from NVIDIA, so that NVIDIA is basically what we integrate in, let's say, data centers and laptops and whatever else, classic devices, but not necessarily so here tablets and mobile phones and other, for example, like drones, etc. Right? And here's where company like Broadcom comes into play. Like Broadcom, for example, provides like the modem chips that pretty much every phone uses. Also, they do like specialized chipsets. And if we see, for example, now we've spoken in previous episodes about the rise of here in AI laptops, and they come already with some AI capacity. And this does not necessarily require the chipsets from NVIDIA. Some of them are powered by, for example, Intel and others. And this would be rather where Broadcom comes here is, so for example, if you were to think about like an Android phone or something, and then this Android phone has some AI chipset, it could likely be so from Broadcom manufacturers. So this is rather, let's say, bringing AI to other devices. So there now AI is like everywhere. If you think about, for example, security cameras, right? They have like face recognition and other functionality. And this has to be integrated in the device itself. It is not happening in the cloud or somewhere else externally. That requires a Broadcom chipset, for example. So I see here more about just this democratization of AI, going away from using a computer or using, so here ChatGPT in the cloud, towards being everywhere, and therefore requiring technology that needs to be implemented in these devices on at the edge.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I think it's kind of following how users are using the devices or access to all these AI solutions, especially when we go down the variable, which is another form of utilizing AI. I think that could be super interesting. But again to Chris's point, right? Like the winners are not set. It's literally being played out as we speak. Because I think previous episode Rod mentioned that how users tend to engage with ChatGPT is via voice. So as that evolve more, you're going to have more variable device. That's super interesting. Going from Broadcom over to another chip maker, we also have ASML, which is a Netherlands-based chip maker. They also invested in a European model company, which we talked about previously, called Mistral, a French AI startup, Mistral. And the Europe chip maker basically invested 1.3 billion into Mistral at leading a 1.7 billion round, which is a huge amount in leading that round. So I find it really interesting, right? From an investment perspective, AI models do not know if it's still the best investment, right? It kind of have like a majority of the big models taking up majority of the funding. And then we're also seeing like this is more of a regional play, at least in my head. But love to hear, Chris Rod, what are your thoughts, especially around the strategic implication on this, geopolitically, or even for someone who wants to pick up the model from a user's perspective?
Maybe I start on this one. So first of all, for everyone, ASML, I mean, we toy around quite a few letters here. So ASML is this Dutch company. And as far as I understand, they are actually the makers for the machines to produce chips. TSMC's, all of these companies, they use the machines from ASML. So they're not necessarily the chip makers per se, but actually the machines behind making those chips. From a geopolitical point of view, and again, Max Rod, you're both based in Europe. Like, I mean, we spoke about sort of EU lagging behind the big giants around the US and China when it comes to developing models. We had episodes on Aleph Alpha being a little bit of a, I don't want to say fake, but definitely lacking behind. Mistral was maybe the only European competitor that could somewhat compete with the bigger models. But also, I don't think any of us really have used, or at least I have not used Mistral. And I do think that from a European point of view, ASML investing such a large amount of money into such a startup is definitely helping. But I wondered, would you guys take it now seriously? Should people in the audience now look and try out Mistral? What's your take, Rod?
Mistral, so here this deal is, I think maybe there is some components of AI sovereignty and so having European companies invest in other European companies more than potential synergies, because ASML is not an Nvidia competitor, so they are in a different part of the value chain of all this chipset industry, and therefore it's not something that Mistral suddenly could start powering its models by the ASML technology. So maybe like medium to long term, ASML could come up with technology for that, but that's not the case right now. And to your point here, so Chris, on the situation here with Mistral, this is likely one of these stories where there was some European leadership and then it was erased by a Chinese player. Indeed, for quite some time, Mistral was leading for open weights models, those that you can install in your computer, you can play locally and so on, and it was giving good results. But then we had a DeepSeek, this Chinese player coming out, and that pretty much so push away Mistral from the market. And Mistral is somewhere middle of the ground, is, let's say, like not like the one of the top students, but so here middle of the list player. That's where it stands right now. Also on their consumer side, if you look at the most popular assistants, nobody's mentioning here Mistral's chat. They use ChatGPT, they use Claude, they use, for example, those provided by Microsoft and others. But nobody, even in France itself, you just go to the Apple Store for France, they are not necessarily like here, like even in the top 20 for productivity apps. They are somewhere in like the top 100 or even above.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think the investment may not necessarily transpire to more earned usage. I guess that's something that I'm thinking. Generally, I feel like every single region is trying to go for AI sovereignty. So love to see how that play out. And I haven't seen any, I will call models, but at the same time, over time, it's less of the model, probably more of the application to build on top. Who knows what will happen? Right? Maybe it's just another form of what I will call specialization from different regions. All right, moving on. We go now from, the West to somehow Central Europe. Now we're moving to Asia. So in Asia, we're seeing a huge loads of AI data centers playing out in the region. I think especially in Malaysia, for example, there are a huge amount of data centers being set up. And this, news was basically Vantage Data Centers raised about, again, 1.6 billions. We're talking about billions nowadays. And in Asia Pacific Infra, where they're setting up, I guess, hyperscale data centers in Malaysia, try to power for the region. I actually find that super interesting, right? It's no longer just built in China or the US, right? I think there was a data from McKinsey where 70% of data or gigawatts today for data centers is actually running out of US and China. And if I'm not wrong, almost 50% of it is in the US. So it's actually quite interesting to see people betting on different regions. With that, I mean, Chris, given that you're based out in the region, love to hear your thoughts about this. How are you thinking about, where to even use different data centers?
Definitely, and I can definitely attest to the fact that there's lots going on actually in the region. I think Malaysia, Thailand are quite big data center hubs, if you will, and you see the giants, like the Metas and Google's actually going into that and also investing heavily in those countries. I think that's in part because of government support. And also, of course, cheap labor. The US building data centers in some state. We spoke briefly about Google's data center in Spain that really consumed a lot of water just simply because to like cool things. And then I think the other piece of information I thought was interesting was that there are a lot of Middle Eastern money flowing into this. And of course the question was like, okay, why not build something in the Middle East? And I think I guess my hypothesis would be that it's just too hot, and you need something where you have better infrastructure in terms of cooling as well as like labor cost. And it's true there's quite a lot of activity coming out of Asia. I could also imagine that that's also from a supply chain point of view, making a lot of sense. You have a lot of very well trained labor there that can handle chips and everything. So my point being, the hardware infrastructure still, in my opinion, lies in parts in Asia. Right, Asia, of course, China, but then also the bigger, the greater region around China. You have Taiwan, obviously being one big chip making hub and paradise. So I could imagine that plays into that, so that you just have the talent, you have the intel, you have the sort of the labor in the region. So it makes a lot of sense to like build it out here, and it costs obviously at a fraction of a cost to build it here than in Europe or in the US.
We can connect this to our segment around Oracle and stock value, where we're seeing how all these infrastructure uh, providers, they are benefiting from significant investor interest in laying out infrastructure for AI around the world. Also, of course, like governments themselves and so sovereign funds and so on, with the idea of sovereign AI. So this just goes hand in hand in this like mega topic that is we need infrastructure that is on each country to host all these AI models. The question will always be, is this similar to the dot-com bubble where we were laying out optic fiber and broadband internet in remote areas, in remote rural areas, hoping that someone will use that, and then in the end, it took maybe like decades to see a return on investment? That'll be a question for that. All this is under the assumption that AI usage is growing rapidly, that there'll be more and more companies that require not only AI capacity, but also AI capacity at a local level. And this remains to be seen, right? We were seeing reports on how companies are struggling to get here value from all these investments. Also, we do not know really for many of these companies how much is translating in revenue from new contracts they're getting just because they're having AI capacity. So many question marks, and then this could be basically built on weak foundations that could be at the end maybe like harmful for everyone. But for the moment, it's a little bit on just this fraudy idea that we need to put AI on every device, on every person's hands, and this will require a significant data center capacity.
Yeah, I think the analogy in my head is or should I say the frame in my head is semiconductors are like public market picks and shovels at the moment, right? Or even data centers, semiconductors are pick and shovels for AI boom. Much like telecom back then, the pipes are picks and shovels for the internet. So I guess that's what the frame I have in my head when I want to support the overall usage of it. Only time will tell whether or not this will work out for everyone. But I do find it interesting where there are a lot of opportunity in this space. And speaking of, I guess, sovereignty before data centers, etc., Europe has been leading on all sorts of regulation, but somehow US came out with their own, US AI sandbox, right, as a proposed regulatory exemption. I would, love to hear both your thought on this, especially Ted Cruz, a US senator, has proposed a 2-year reg sandbox for AI to test products with very little oversight. It reminds me of like the FCA sandbox that allows you to try different things with a lot more oversight, but you get the gist. So I think do not know what both of you think. It could be a positive thing, and also it's within a controlled environment, at least in my head. Maybe Chris.
I think this is so funny, right? Like there's this like mantra in the EU where it's all about regulating, right? We have the EU Act. Companies are supposed to like follow a 7-step type of program of how to like ensure that the AI they're using is safe and reduced risk. If they don't do this or comply to it, they would have to like be fined. And it's a really big sum, which I don't remember at this point in time. But obviously the oversight isn't there yet that the Brussels could actually do and really do this type of audit. And then on the other side, we have this new piece of news around the US exempting AI companies from being regulated very tightly. And I think this is really to keep that AI race going and be at the forefront of it. And it's quite interesting, I think, from a cultural perspective to see this type of dynamic. I believe also in recent years, China actually came up with an AI act of some sorts, also trying to regulate more. So in that way, I think the US is turning a blind eye. It will definitely help to spur innovation. I think as long as the AI company is good, like Google's mantra of not doing anything evil, I think it will midterm help the US to do have an edge versus the other companies. But does it come with risk? I would 100% agree that probably there are some companies that will also exploit this exemption.
It's hard to say at the end how this will be implemented, how this will look like in practice and so on. I mean, I don't feel that already it's not that there is that much regulations for AI, especially like at the US level. And for the most part, this comes to vendors themselves restricting what's possible and so on. But that is not necessarily because some government, especially like outside Europe, is telling them to do so. Constantly you hear requests from different figures saying we need to stop development, we need to slow down, whereas others are like maximalist and want to accelerate things. So how would this sandbox be? So the act will be drafted. How would that be used, and who will be using that? Many open questions. And then I also wonder if that will really change something. I'm not sure. So this is maybe it's too early, and then later we can like assess if that makes sense or not.
Yeah, it's like a massive deregulation, right? What I have in my head is basically trying to deregulate everything, or at least create the environment for people to try different things. And I think to Chris's point, the difference in culture is stark, right? In Europe, it's all about institution. It comes down with some sort of a regulation, where in the US, it's all about innovation. Just move whatever way you can. It for our news segment, in which we talk about 6 different topics with 6 very different large deals that's going on. Just a quick recap. So we talk a little bit about Microsoft's integrating Anthropic Claude into Office application. Then we talk a little bit about Oracle and OpenAI's blockbuster deal, which skyrocketed Larry Ellison and Oracle stock. And then we talk about Broadcom securing AI chip orders, and also a chip making equipment company, ASML, investing into a French AI startup. And lastly, about US's AI Sandbox Act that is being proposed for regulatory exemption for AI startup. And for more news, please follow us on Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, where we bring you all the latest AI news every single week. Thank you. Tune in and speak to you guys soon.